It's a coming day when we're out of here. That's the good news. Today's the bad news, and today we're talking about something a little bit dark. We're going to talk about the period of tribulation. Now, I was actually kind of hoping it would be a lot hotter today. I was kind of hoping that the air quality would be a lot worse because I thought, let's give them a little taste of, what it's like to be in this world when the world, the world around us locally is on fire, right? And there's coming a day when this whole world is on fire. This place is, talk about bad air quality, talk about being scorched by the sun. Some of the descriptions were given in the book of Revelation about the period of tribulation. It's not a time that you would want to be here. 2020 for us is like catastrophe, right? Constant. But there's coming a day when they'll look back on years like 2020, it'll be paradise compared to what comes to this world. So we've been looking at the end times, and we've done a little acronym for end times. The E in end was for an event timeline that we kind of look through as a whole, a bird's eye view of the events that are laid out for us prophetically. The N in end was for nations and prophecy. We looked at kind of where things are at, where things are heading with the nations of this world. The D was for the departure of the church, which we looked at last time. And today begins the T, which is for tribulation. I have to do this in two parts because it is a very extensive subject. The period of tribulation is a period of 7 years that is mentioned many times in the Bible. It is found in Daniel chapter 9. It's the 70th week of a prophecy that God gave to Daniel. There would be 70 weeks of years, 490 years, and 483 of those years have been prophetically fulfilled. There's a period of 7 years left to be fulfilled that is yet future. And so you find a lot of information in the Old Testament about that period of 7 years. You find a lot about it in the New Testament. Jesus himself talked about it in Matthew 24, Luke 21. And he gave this information to his disciples in response to a question that they asked him, what will be the signs of your coming? We are encouraged to know the seasons and the signs. And when we as God's people prophetically understand the happenings of this world, where things are going, it really changes our worldview. We look at global events and realize that a lot of this stuff around us is making a lot of sense. There are a lot of signs of the times and that we're seeing even today. For instance, we talked about the political bodies around us in this world that are pushing for a new world order, kind of a globalistic political monetary system. We talked about the European Union, the United Nations and such. There are also, and I don't know that I talked about this, but there are religious bodies that are trying to create a more unified religion, a world religion that really becomes the umbrella under which all religions would fit. You've got the World Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches, and others, very ecumenical, just trying to bring us all under one umbrella. We are essentially seeing a move towards a revived Roman Empire, which the Bible describes will characterize the end, a one-world political, religious, economic power. The Bible says it is coming. It isn't a question of whether it's coming, more of a question of when it's coming. And that end times political religious system we looked at before, it harkens back to the Tower of Babel in the Old Testament, very reminiscent of what humanity was trying to build at that time. So the challenge that we have as Americans growing up in the superpower of the West is just trying to imagine how power will shift from the West back to the East, back to Europe. Well, we know in Daniel 9:26, when talking about the Antichrist, it says that he is from the people who destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. Well, who were the people who destroyed Jerusalem? Who destroyed the temple? That was the Romans. So the Antichrist figure will be European, we believe. And power will be largely centralized in Europe. I know I've mentioned this before, how America is really not mentioned in the end times, and that has baffled a lot of theologians over the years. Where is America? What becomes of this superpower? And I thought it would be interesting just to say a few things about this, kind of setting the stage for what I'm going to talk about, because I think we understand if we get into the period of tribulation and we don't see America, then something has to have happened to our country. And we can only speculate as to what that is. But one thing we do know, no superpower, no empire lasts forever. Do you know what the average lifespan of an empire is? Any guesses? 250 years. Guess how long we've been a nation? 244 years. Now, I'm not suggesting by any means that we won't get past the 250 mark. That's an average. This isn't in any way trying to suggest that America is going to decline overnight or within weeks, months, or even years. It may be decades. I don't know. But one of the things that I do know is that we have much in common with Rome of old, and we are following a pattern that led ultimately to their demise as an empire. Central to an empire's power is its wealth. Well, one of the problems that Rome was up against was that they couldn't control their spending. They were spending more than they were able to collect in taxes, and so that led to a debasement of their currency. So they took their gold and their silver currency and they began clipping coins. They'd clip the edges off, they'd remelt those, try to make more coins. And when it still didn't have enough coins in circulation, they began melting down the gold and silver coins and adding really cheap metals to the point where you got coins eventually that had very little silver or gold in them. They would change the denomination of coins. They would take a coin that maybe had a 1 on it and they'd stamp a 5 over the 1. Essentially what they saw in the Roman Empire was hyperinflation, which impoverished the people. But Rome had an answer to this to try to keep the people from noticing that they were poor, essentially bread and circus. You've heard that said before, I'm sure, but bread and circus was all about, one, entertaining the masses. That's why they held those gladiatorial games, chariot races and such. But one of the other things they did is they had subsidies of grain where they were giving people, essentially they were giving them free stuff, giving them things of value. And that they believed would help to quell any uprisings, any revolts. Does that sound familiar to where we are in our country today? We are in an entertainment society. A lot of people don't care that the world around them is burning as long as their favorite team is winning. Things are being given out to people subsidy-wise more and more in this country. I think that we as a nation are rapidly entering or about to enter a phase of hyperinflation. It may be deflationary for a time, but many economists say that with all the printing of the money, same thing's going to happen that happened in Rome. It's going to happen in America. I don't know if you've ever looked at the debt clock. Have you ever pulled that up and you watch as the debt is showing real time how fast that's growing? And just take a look at the unfunded liabilities, GDP, the nation's debt and such. And what you discover is that as a nation, we're already bankrupt. They're trying to print our way out of it. Well, it didn't work for Rome. It's not going to work for our nation either. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other options that presently we have that they may not have had back then. I believe that they do have some options where they could bring things back economically, but I don't know if they will. There are other factors to an empire's decline, one of which is a loss of collective morality. I found this very disturbing that 27% of millennials, when asked their religion of preference, they checked a box that said none. They had no religion of preference. How many of you were alive in the 1950s? Do you remember the collective morality? It wasn't a perfect time, but I think people largely agreed on general morality, and we see something very different today, where gross immorality is even being justified. I have to say I was appalled at this SB 145 that was passed here in California. If you've looked into that, where they really it's a protection for pedophiles, and how this can happen in our country, it's just beyond me. It's quite sickening, to be honest. And the thing that we have to understand as America is that we have had the light of God's word, his truth, and that's kind of, in many ways, it's going to be a strike against us as a nation, having had the light and then having it rejected the way it has been in so many places in this nation. There is a greater accountability for any nation who knew the truth and then ultimately rejected it. One of our saving graces is that we are supporters of Israel as a nation. And I think that may continue to solidify our place in this world and on the world stage as long as we continue to support Israel. The day we pull that support will be the day that I think we're in big trouble. Saying all that to say that there will be a power shift at some point. When we get to the period of tribulation, America has gone into decline, at least to some great degree, because it's not even mentioned. Some of the other obstacles to the tribulation occurring would be certain nations in the East, which would oppose things like a one-world religion, for instance, and these would be the Muslim nations. We know that the Muslims would never accept a one-world religion. The Bible gives us an answer to what happens or what becomes of the Muslim nations. Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38, we talked about this. One entire message was devoted to understanding these prophecies that relate to a coming day when there will be wars with Israel. And through military conquest, Israel will defeat its immediate neighbors geographically. And then we see a supernatural defeat of their outlying neighbors, Iran, Russia, and others. These are all predicted in those chapters of the Bible. And it makes a lot of sense because when you understand that at the beginning of the tribulation, Israel is building the temple. And you say that's not possible because what's sitting right where the temple should be? The Dome of the Rock. In order to build the temple, something's got to happen to the Dome of the Rock. We may have an answer in Ezekiel 38 where it says there's this great earthquake that God brings upon those Muslim invaders, where it says that the earthquake just brings down walls. Maybe this is when the Dome of the Rock comes down. Either way, when the Muslim nations largely are defeated by Israel and by God, there won't be anyone to contest if it's a matter of Israel just tearing it down and rebuilding their temple. But we know that that is going to happen. Before, or maybe after, we don't know when these wars take place in relation to the tribulation. We believe that they take place towards the beginning, whether before or after the rapture, we don't know. But around this time, we know that another cataclysmic event will occur on this earth that we call the rapture. Now, we don't think of that as a cataclysmic event because we're looking forward to being the ones going up. We look at that as being a glorious event. But let's use a little sanctified imagination to ponder what the rapture will be like for those who are left behind, and how this could very well be a trigger event that will help to usher in that period of tribulation. You remember 9/11? Of course you remember 9/11. 9/11, we saw 3,000 plus individuals lose their lives in those towers, and it changed a lot in our nation, didn't it? It changed the way we traveled. It changed our foreign policy. It changed our rights to privacy as a people. Right now, we're in the midst of what they call a pandemic that has impacted our economy, and it has changed life as we know it in many ways. But you see, those kinds of events will pale in comparison to the changes that will be brought to this world when the rapture occurs. I just want you to imagine for a moment a day when 1 billion people, and I don't know what the number will be, maybe it will be less than that, maybe more than that, I don't know. But imagine 1 billion people disappearing off the face of the earth, just gone in an instant. No explanation. Drivers, Christians, driving their cars to and from work suddenly disappear. Imagine how many millions of car crashes will occur in that moment. Christian pilots, gone. Airplanes falling out of the sky. We've got people in their homes cooking their meals, and they're gone. And now there's no one to turn off the stoves. There's fires everywhere. You have the Christian military and political leaders gone. Police, military personnel diminished in size because of all the Christians who will be out of here. And so they're trying to deal with a mass population of people who have just endured something they don't understand. People are in panic. People are injured. People don't know what to do. And I don't know if you recall back during Katrina, the amount of crime that took place during that catastrophe, how people took advantage of it. Some people just lost their heads. They didn't know what to do, and they were frightened and scared, this whole panic syndrome type of thing. It was said that on 9/11 or shortly thereafter, law-abiding citizens, people with no records whatsoever, good men and women, were raiding ATMs, tearing them apart, trying to get money out. Some of them were imprisoned for that crime. They just lost their mind. So imagine at a time when people are losing their head, people are injured, there's fear in the streets, chaos. Many of the medical professionals are gone. Christian-run hospitals without services. Much of the humanitarian relief in our world, and especially in the United States, comes from Christians. So many of those services will be unavailable. And of all the nations hit, who do you think is going to be hit the hardest? Well, probably America, because we probably have one of the greatest concentrations of Christians in all the world. You think foreclosures are bad now? Imagine millions of homes without occupants, no one to pay the bills. Christian employers gone, no one to pay their employees. Fewer people to tax. Economically, we're kind of at a tipping point already. This is the kind of thing that would push a nation over. But it won't be the physical disaster or even the economic. It's going to be something far worse than that, and that is going to be the grief. The grief, can you imagine the unsaved spouse whose loved one is suddenly gone because they were a Christian and their spouse wasn't? What about the children? I believe the children will go up in the rapture. I do. I don't believe I'd have much hope and comfort as a child of God looking forward to the rapture if I had little kids and thought, you know what, they're going to be left behind. I'm going to go up and they're going to have to stay here and face all that stuff in this world without me. I don't believe that's the case. I think God's going to take children. And so now you have millions upon millions of parents whose children have vanished. You ever watched on the news when parents are pleading with the public to help them find their children who went missing? They don't know if they were kidnapped. They don't know if they ran off. And the despair. I mean, just think in your own life with having kids, those moments in the mall when you turn around, your kid's gone. It could be 30 seconds, but it's sheer panic. And in the case of those who lose their children in the rapture, there's no closure. There's no answers given. I believe there probably will be a lot of suicide shortly after the rapture in this world. People who can't deal with the losses, friends and family. At that time, our nation would be in no position to help anyone but themselves, and it may very well be at that time that the events of Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 play out, where the Muslim nations look at America. The Muslim nations maybe not hit as hard, maybe not as great a concentration of Christians, so they're not quite in the same turmoil the other nations are, and they see America as preoccupied, it's diminished, and so they go after Israel. I don't know, maybe that's the timing of that. But here's the good news. The good news is that for you and I, as the children of God, we are not going to be here to witness the fallout of the rapture. Of course, we're going to be on the other end of it. Revelation chapter 4, and you can open your Bibles to chapter 6. We're going to go there in a moment. Make a pit stop at chapter 4 if you'd like. So after describing the churches in Revelation 2 and 3, Revelation chapter 4, the Apostle John, in verse 1, says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet, speaking with me, said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things.' Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting upon the throne." And he goes on to describe that individual. That, of course, is Jesus Christ. So after describing the churches in chapters 2 and 3, you have this, I would call it, rapture event. It's symbolic of the rapture. John the Apostle is raptured up into heaven. You notice it's at the sound of a trumpet, someone speaking, calling him up, a door open, and he was up in heaven at this moment. And now watching everything unfold from chapters 6 through 18, which is all about the tribulation, he's watching it from the vantage point of heaven. And so you and I, as God's people, we will also, after the rapture, be there with the Lord, beholding the very things that John describes here. We will be looking down. The Bible even says as much, that there will be moments where we're looking down and seeing the things that God is doing upon this earth. Something very interesting occurs that sets the stage for the judgments that I want to talk about this morning. Chapter 5, verse 1, "I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a book written inside and on the back, sealed up with 7 seals." We're going to talk about the 7 seals in a moment. "And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, 'Who is worthy to open the book and to break its seals?' And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the book or to look into it. Then I began to weep greatly, because no one was found worthy to open the book or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, 'Stop weeping. Behold, the Lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome so as to open the book and its 7 seals.' And I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures and the elders a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he came and he took the book out of the right hand of him who sat upon the throne." Now this is a very important moment when it comes to the judgments to follow. What is this scroll that is taken by Jesus? Many believe that this is the title deed to the universe. John says there was nobody found worthy to take the scroll. because there's none other worthy but God himself. And Jesus takes that scroll, that title deed to the universe, and what follows in chapter 16 through 18 is how the Lord is going to take back the world and its authority from Satan, who has tried to usurp that authority. And he does so by allowing Satan to make his final attempt at making this world his own. But this world doesn't belong to the devil. It belongs to God. And this is why this is referred to, this period of time and time following, referred to as the day of the Lord. This is not Satan's day like he thinks it is. This is the day of the Lord. And the Lord is going to take back the rights to that universe. So the tribulation is all about God pouring out his judgment upon his enemy, upon those upon the earth who stand in disbelief. So the tribulation of 7 years is divided into two halves. It's often described as 3.5 years, 3.5 years. Sometimes it's 42 months, 42 months. Other times it's 1,260 days, 1,260 days. And that's on the Jewish calendar. All of those would just simply point out that there's going to be two halves. And very significant events occur during the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. But one of the things we're going to see is that there is a total of 21 judgments that God is going to pour out upon this world. 21 different judgments. There's 7 seal judgments, 7 trumpet judgments, and 7 bowl judgments. And I believe that these are sequential judgments because it says when you get to the 7th seal that is opened, it opens up 7 more judgments, the trumpet judgment. 7th trumpet judgment opens up to the bowl judgments. We know that the seal judgments occur right from the outset of the tribulation, and we know that they end up with the bowl judgments. How they are spaced out within that 7-year period of time, we don't know exactly, but if I had to guess, I would say that most of the judgments will occur in the second half. That is the time known as the Great Tribulation. And one of the reasons that I believe that is something Jesus said in Matthew 24, where he describes sequentially, in the same order, the sealed judgments that we're going to look at today. And following this description, you'll notice what he says. So here's his description. Speaking of this time, many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, will mislead many, such as the Antichrist will. You will hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for these things must take place. But that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. So Jesus here is basically describing what we would see as these 7 seal judgments, and he says that's just the beginning. What are birth pains for a woman who's pregnant? Well, they are pains that increase in frequency and intensity, right? That's how you know that a woman is getting closer and closer to delivering the child, is that the contractions get closer and closer and stronger and stronger. And that's Jesus' description of the end times. There's going to be judgments, and maybe they'll start off a little bit slower, but they're going to increase in frequency and intensity. And the pain felt by the world inhabitants will grow and grow as they do. So I want to look in Revelation chapter 6, just taking the first half of the tribulation today, in verses 1 and 2. As Jesus takes this scroll, he begins opening the seals, 7 seals. What is the first seal? When I saw the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying as with a voice of thunder, Come. I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, who is it that sits upon a white horse? When you get to the end of the book of Revelation, we see another individual on a white horse coming to conquer. And that would, of course, be the Lord Jesus Christ. But here, that's not speaking of Jesus Christ. This is talking about Satan's counterfeit. Remember, I said Satan is a counterfeiter, and the counterfeit is the Antichrist figure who comes in a way that imitates Christ, in the sense that he believes himself to be something of a Messiah, a Savior. At least that's how he will present himself to the world. And remember, this is at a time of chaos, where the rapture event had occurred. There's chaos. And by the way, the rapture is not what starts the tribulation. I'll mention in a moment what does. But there's going to be a period of time, I believe, maybe not very long, between those events. But in that time, there may be wars and other things, the wars of Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83, what have you. But the world's in chaos. It's in turmoil. And what does the world do in times when, economically things are really, really bad? And things politically are really, really bad. They look for leadership. You have the rise of men like Hitler, who just come upon the scenes very quickly because people are looking for someone to fill that void, that vacuum that's been created. They want answers. And here's this man who's, according to the Bible, good looking. He's seemingly wise. He's eloquent. And he comes on the scene, and the Bible says here he comes with a bow in his hand. It doesn't say he has a bow and arrow, just a bow. In other words, he has a show of strength, but he doesn't have to use it. He conquers through diplomacy, not by force. It says that the crown was given to him. People welcomed his leadership. And according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, this is the one whose coming is in accordance with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish because they did not receive the love of the truth as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence, so that they will believe what is false. This man will come back, and he will have powers. Satan will empower him to do signs and wonders, and people will see that, and he will seem to them to be something supernatural. And it says that he puts forth a lie, and God will actually, it says God sends a deluding influence. He allows mankind to be deceived by this man, so that they believe the lie. Whatever that lie is, maybe it's some explanation of what took place at the rapture. People are going to want to know, where did my kids go? And maybe he's going to offer some explanation. Who knows? But we do know that one of the first things that he accomplishes that will put him in the books as the greatest diplomat who ever existed is he will create peace with Israel. A 7-year covenant peace treaty. Daniel chapter 9 tells us that when they sign that peace treaty, that is the start of the 7-year period of tribulation. So there's some time between the rapture and the rise of this man to this moment where the treaty is signed. I don't know how long that period of time will be, but that's the beginning. This man who comes from the people who destroyed the temple in 70 AD, at this time will allow Israel then to start rebuilding their temple. I told you, I think a couple weeks back, about the Temple Institute, which they actually have the furnishings according to the Bible specifications, all the furnishings from the temple. They've got them made and built. They've got all the building materials for this temple. They've got all the bricks and the stones numbered so that when it comes time to build it, they know exactly where they go. They could just throw this thing up in no time. It's all ready. And I told you that they recently found a red heifer, something that hasn't been seen for maybe hundreds of years. And the reason that a red heifer is so important is because in order to rebuild the temple, according to the Old Testament, they have to purify the site with the ashes of a red heifer. Well, there were no red heifers until just in the last couple years. Right now, as we speak, in Texas, they're raising a couple of red heifers. The rabbis will check on them to make sure they're staying clean so that they can use them in their ashes to rebuild the temple. I'm telling you, this is setting the stage. It's happening. Now, speaking of red animals, let's look at the second seal that is broken. And these, by the way, there's 4 horsemen in chapter 6. We call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Number 2, verse 3, when he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take the peace from the earth, that the men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. Interesting that the Antichrist comes with a promise of peace. He presents himself as a man of peace, but shortly after he's accepted by the masses, we find the world is already at war. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, people will be crying, "Peace, peace," and sudden destruction will come upon them. Whether this is some of the militaries of the world, the nations of the world challenging the Antichrist, I don't really know, but the peace ends and the war breaks out. And you notice that it says that a big sword was given to this rider. Many have said that perhaps that's speaking of nuclear power. And it certainly would help us explain what follows when we get to the third horseman in verse 5. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Do not damage the oil and the wine." Now we have the black horse, and this is famine. course, after wars, you often have food shortages, depending on the destruction of the battles themselves upon the land, the failure of men to plant their fields because they're at war, or whether this is talking about contamination from some nuclear event. We don't know, but we know that famine follows upon the war. And it's interesting, this writer has weights in his hand. What's that all about? It says a quart of wheat for a denarius. What is that? Well, a denarius was a working man's wage for an entire day. So if you worked to put in a good long day, you got a denarius. And with that denarius, you could go out and buy a quart of wheat. Well, how much is that? That's enough food for one person for one day. In other words, you work an entire day to get enough money to buy enough food just for yourself. And that means if you have a family of 4 or 5, you don't have enough food to feed your family. Say, man, that's some crazy hyperinflation, you know. This is what we're seeing in places like Venezuela, by the way. The average person in Venezuela makes 132,000 bolivars in a month. That sounds like a lot, 132,000. Wow, well, that's $6. Not $6 an hour, not $6 a day, $6 a month. Minimum wage is 40,000. So in a month, there are people making $2. It's enough to buy a pack of corn and 2 pounds of sugar. You say, how do they survive? Well, they have family that have gone out to places like the United States. They're sending money back to help them survive. Well, here's the thing about the tribulation is that these people are going to be in this situation where they don't have enough money to buy the food to live, and there's nobody to help them. There's nowhere they can go to get the help. It does suggest that there's still going to be wealthy individuals. I take this from the very end where it says, do not damage the oil and the wine. Many have suggested that this is a reference to the income gap or class gap that will exist during that time. You know, the worst of political systems are the ones where you have the biggest gap between the lower class and the upper class. In other words, at this time, there will be no middle class. There's going to be extremely poor people who are starving to death, and then there will be the very select few who have the oil and the wine, who are still living that lavish life. We're going to talk about the kings here in a moment. What about the fourth? Verse 7, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, come. And I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, that's like a pale green horse. And he who sat on it had the name Death. And Hades was following him. Authority was given to him over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, and with the wild beasts of the earth. So we have disease which often follows times of famine. And this is a horseman who is granted to kill a quarter of the world's population. We are talking about billions of people. They will die of disease. They will die from previous famine, the sword. And even mentions wild beasts. You know, the beasts are going to be starving just like the people. It's going to be a frightening time to live. Go out for a walk, you know, in a place like this, and you got to worry about all the wild animals that are hungry for you. That's the kind of thing it's going to be like. Well, let's look at the fifth seal that's broken. Verse 9, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. Now you might be scratching your head at this one, because we're still in the first 3.5 years, and suddenly we're talking about people who know the Lord, who were persecuted and slain. Now you might be scratching your head and saying, wait a minute, you just said we were raptured out of here. How can there be saved people? How can they come to know the truth if the church isn't here? Well, there's an answer to that question. There will be a group of people raised up, I believe almost immediately when the tribulation begins, who will be bearing the truth throughout the nations. And it's described for us. I don't have a lot of time. In chapter 7, it talks about, verse 4, I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Further describes them in chapter 14. But essentially what you have here are 144,000. These are Jewish male virgins. Okay? And this is important because when the Jehovah's Witness comes and knocks at your door and claiming that they're the 144,000, you could take them to the passage in chapter 14 that says that they're going to be one of the 12 tribes, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. They're all going to be men, and they're all going to be unmarried men. In other words, virgin men. And these individuals are going to come to the knowledge of Christ, to the knowledge of the truth, and they're going to go throughout the whole world preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And you may be familiar with passages that talk about before Christ coming, the gospel has to go into all the world, and people think, well, in order for the rapture to come, that has to take place. But it's talking about the second coming of Christ. And these individuals are like 144,000 Apostle Pauls who will take the truth of the word to the ends of the earth. And they are so successful later in chapter 7, verse 11, as John is looking on this massive group of individuals there in heaven, and he's baffled. Who are these people? In verse 14, an angel answers and says, these are the ones who came out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Let's see, earlier it talks about them being from every tongue, tribe, and nation. So they're going to be very successful to reach people for Christ. And by the way, there are two other witnesses during that period of time, and they're described in chapter 11, verse 3. I will grant authority to my two witnesses that they will prophesy for 1,260 days, that's 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire flows from their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, they must be killed in this way. These have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying, and they will have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. So as well as 144,000 Jews, you also have these two witnesses. So most scholars agree that one of them is going to be Elijah. Remember, Elijah never died. God took him up. There's another rapture event. He was taken up while he was alive. Well, he is going to be one who precedes Christ in his second coming, according to the prophecies. This other individual, we don't know exactly. Some have mentioned Enoch because he also experienced kind of a rapture event, was taken up without dying, and he did a lot of prophesying, according to Jude. Others believe that this will be Moses, because Moses certainly fits the description of one who would turn the waters to blood and all of these things that occurred back in the plagues of Egypt. And by the way, it was Elijah and Moses that stood with Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration, so it very well could be Elijah and Moses. But the point is that these two individuals are going to be sent to the earth for the period of 3.5 years. I believe it's the first 3.5 years. And they will prophesy. And if anyone opposes them, it says fire will proceed from their mouth and destroy their enemies. These individuals will have great power during that period of time. And we're going to look at what becomes of them next time. It's a very interesting story. But the point that I want to make is God may be allowing the suffering upon this earth, but he does so with a promise of relief to those who believe. He's still extending the offer of salvation. Later in 7:16, speaking of these individuals, they will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb is the center of the throne. He will be their shepherd, will guide them to the springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. In other words, those individuals who had been upon the earth and they had gone through many of these judgments, God is saying there's a period of relief for these individuals. Well, finally, in the number 6 in verse 12, the sixth seal, I looked, and when he broke the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. So up until now, these sealed judgments have been catastrophic, but somewhat natural in their occurrence, right? These are natural disasters, we would call them. Things like war and famine, pestilence, that kind of thing. Well, this is where things become somewhat supernatural. You have this earthquake, and many have suggested maybe that it's volcanic in nature because of the darkening out of the sun, the ash being spewed into the atmosphere, the discoloration of the moon and such. But it also says here that the stars of the sky fell to the earth. Now remember, John is looking at this, and he's seeing this unfold. He sees these things that we call them shooting stars, because that's what it looks like, stars falling out of the sky. So we're talking probably about meteors just falling. And it says like standing under a fig tree when shaken of of a big wind. Did we grow figs in California? Is that a thing? Has anyone ever seen the wind shake them? I'm just curious because I don't know. Like, does that really happen? Do they